This storm has caused confusion and delay.
You have caused
Confusion and delay.
that is the pure face prejudice.
Daisy is just the ultimate fart. Daisy is just the ultimate fart.
Your impatience has caused confusion and delay. This storm has caused confusion and delay. You are causing confusion and delay. You cause confusion and delay.
26 years old and you can't even drive? I can. Are you stupid, eh? Are you a stupid fool? Well, why can't you drive then? You can't even drive! Bit grey today.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another Deepest Law. This is actually the final Deepest Law on a Monday. From next week, it's going to shift back to Wednesdays. I think it was a Wednesday stream originally.
It was,
correct me
yeah.
if I'm wrong.
Return.
Yeah, we're returning to Wednesdays. There's just various. The way my weeks have panned out, it just makes sense to do it on Wednesdays. And Cigar Stream will be a 9 p.m. Monday stream, which I think it was back in the day as well.
No, it was Friday. It was Friday, which was made it so fun.
Yeah, I can't do Fridays anymore, sadly.
Friday chill out. Yeah.
Anyway, welcome everyone. I haven't been well, so if I'm a little bit out of it, it's because I spent all night being sick. I have what do they call it, norovirus or vomiting bug. It is horrible. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. I mean, I won't go into too much detail, but you know, it affects you at both ends. Just to say, so there are some. How can I say? You have to there are some opportunity cost decisions you have to make at like 3:30 a.m. in the morning. You know, it's horrendous, absolutely horrendous. Anyway,
it clears quickly though. So you
well, I mean, I dare not eat anything today, so I'm drinking. Dash water, sparkling water infused with wonky peaches. That's my current
I
drink.
still want to know, what is a wonky peach?
It's I think it's probably the it says here, wonky fruit is reducing food waste by accepting misfits. We judge on taste, not on looks. So it's like
it's all the shit fruit.
It's it's like the raggy dolls of the peach world are rather than throw them away, they give them to this company to make
rather than pop them in the bin where they should be, they squeeze them
in the
charge
reject
you a
bin.
fortune. Yeah.
Do you know, speaking of the raggy dolls, if you go back and watch my Boomer Truth series, I reckon I am the only person in the entire world ever to do a juxtaposition between raggy dolls and Trumpdom as a critique of liberal democracy. I feel like that's one of the more original things I ever did. So
you need to do Paw Patrol versus Transformers next. So that's the
I
Zoomers.
can't stand watching Paw Patrol's awful. I can't stand it. Anyway, welcome.
I just on that subject. There were I remember when I was in university and afterwards achieving various useless degrees. There was an epidemic of people in cultural studies programs, lit programs, writing dissertations that had that very same flavor.
Yes.
10,000 Plateau and its relationship to Garfield.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there was a lot of that.
A
And the
liminal
difference
perspective
is,
of divergent homosexualities. Yes.
The difference is that they had really, when you get down to it, they had nothing to say about those things. It's usually some vapid student who's like, oh, I want to write about Harry Potter or whatever, Anyway, I'll just remind people, do buy my courses. Do you remember I said to you I'm even Steven, like Jerry Seinfeld D? Right.
Yeah.
Yesterday I was like, oh, good money coming in. I enjoy money. I've been doing my push on
I enjoy money.
Yeah, I've been doing my push on
academic agent.
foundations of writing, and people have been taking me up on it. And then yesterday I woke up and I had a complete flat tire on my car, and obviously I had AAA at the lodge over the weekend. She just loves coming to the lodge. We've got into this pattern a little bit where we do fun stuff on the weekends, but obviously I had to take her home, and the lodge is in the middle of nowhere. So I was like, so I briefly contemplated putting the spare, taking the tire off and putting the spare on. But I don't know if you've ever had a flat before. Like, garages are awful. They're just like, oh yeah, we can fit you in on Thursday. I was like, what do you mean Thursday? I need my car now. So I ended up calling like the guy out who comes to where you are and changes the tire there and then. But you remember, even Stevens, they're not cheap, right? So
no,
all the money I made, I then had to give to that dude. So it's a shame.
I love the idea of you changing a tire. That's very, very funny to me.
I actually got the jack out and I got the spare tire out. AAA was loving it. She was like, oh, "What are you doing, Daddy?" and all this. And then I was just like, "I'm gonna ring." I rang the guy. I didn't do it. So anyway, yeah.
Sad. Almost a chance there to kind of show off your manly skills, but it was not to be.
Any of you guys got anything you want to shill other than my courses, Pharaoh?
No, I mean we did a good stream the other night on Cigar Stream. I know that D has taken umbrage with my in-depth analysis of the boomers and the problems that come with them, but I thought it was an interesting discussion nonetheless. I guess Lamster's coming up. I'm part of that. That's going to be on. I'm streaming on the 30th. I guess you guys are going to be on Lander's Easter schedule.
I'm booked in for a day. Yeah, I'm booked in for some day or other. 29th, I seem to remember.
Yeah, so I think he's saying it's 40 guests over a couple of days. Really worth checking that out. It's always good. So yeah,
I'm going to be talking about postmodernism apparently. So.
I know I did get. Did you get assigned the title basically?
Yeah, I got a subject as well. Ooh.
What was your topic? Mine was postmodernism. I don't know what you think I can say about that, but I can say quite a lot.
My one was, I think it's like after the function, like beyond functional, something like that. So that's easy. I can just talk of transcendent matters. That was easy.
Transcendent matters. I love the. I mean, talk about self-confidence, Pharaoh. Transcendent matters. No sweat for him.
Just the sheer arrogance. This is what to say. The millennial narcissism. You see, that's it.
Okay, I know. I think you're perfectly capable. Let's see. My topic is the theme for the day is creating culture. I wonder if we could talk about creating visual art. So, creating visual art, which of course is one of my favorite topics. So I don't know, talking about paint and talking about glue.
You should do a live art creation on the stream as it happens.
Oh, I could do that. And by the way, I set you up, AA, and you didn't even respond.
Set me up with what?
I'm going to talk about paint and talk about glue.
Oh yes, sorry, I'm not quite with it today. I'm not.
What a jolly boring.
What a jolly boring thing to do, indeed. Yes. Yeah, I think I'm probably going to do like an hour's lecture on the difference between Jean-Francois Lyotard and Frederick Jameson, and yet again do this idea that I'm a crypto-Marxist, not a lot of favors, because I actually prefer the Marxist definition of postmodernism as a kind of condition that you can't escape, rather than a kind of aesthetic choice. Which is what it is in Lyotard. Yeah.
We're clearly on the narrative arc where AA ends up as part of Novara Media, streaming with Ash Sarkar, going on about his like Marxist tendencies, isn't it?
She's never read Lyotard. Come on.
I mean, yeah.
You know.
I came of age intellectually, was surrounded, drowning in all that muck. So. Yeah.
I mean, we came. We were talking a bit before the stream, and we will get into these the beauty of books, which is the topic of the stream soon. But there is this strange idea among some Zoomers that the way to navigate quote unquote boomer truth is to basically reject, like, act as if the past 70 years never existed. Like, oh, why would I want to watch Scarface? That's cringe. I just don't understand that. I think you have to kind of accept that this is the moment we're in and be aware of it and kind of know. I mean, my my critique of Boomer Truth almost comes from a place of love. Like I kind of know it inside out, and that's how I'm able to critique it. But a lot of our young friends are just like, you know, they've got this idea that having contact with any part of it will taint you or something. Which is just like, dude, you're already pre-tainted, always already tainted. To use another Marxist phrase.
the taint is strong on Zoomers. Yeah. Another day. I will say just before we start, it's wonderful to have Ferro back on the Deepest Lore. Always happy to see him. So,
thank you, Mr. D.
Well, so Ferro, why don't you tell us what the stream is about?
Yeah. So, I mean, part of this is trying to fulfill the meme of the bookbinding stream. So many moons ago, there was a fanatical commenter on various Deepest Lore streams asking for a stream on bookbinding. Now, I have to be honest, this is not a stream on bookbinding, but I am a fan of books. I'm a fan of printing and have been for a long time. I am a collector of a humble collector of a few small tomes. And I thought it could be an interesting topic for discussion because there's many different aspects to books from, just obviously they're kind of themselves as a beautiful object, but also they're kind of tied into history and to a moment as well, with things like the printing press and different techniques, etc. So, people often say don't judge a book by its cover. That's very much not the case today. So, and I know that Mr. D was also, I mean, he's a bit of a master printmaker as well. So that's where the kind of D crossover comes in as well.
I think those were
the beans. The beans are ready.
Sorry, I will check on the beans. But yeah. I mean, yes, I was certainly not a master printer, although I occasionally work with one, and the difference between me and him is astounding. But yes, I do a lot of printing in my career. We could talk about printmaking perhaps when we get to the the kind of illustration section. Yeah, and let me just drop one piece of flair. Did you know that the word book comes from Old English? It means beach, possibly in relation to early writing being done on pieces of beech bark.
Yeah. If at Hadrian's Wall, they've recovered many kind of beech inscriptions from the soldiers up there. So you can kind of get these little snippets of people's lives. And I guess that kind of lends us nicely onto this. Obviously, the kind of idea of a book has like a bit of a history itself. I don't want to go too much into it, but basically, writing hasn't actually been around for a huge period of time. Obviously, kind of earliest forms include kind of like cuneiform. The classic sarcons, waxed clay tablets. But by about the Roman times, there was these kind of very, very rudimentary forms of storing writing. So specifically, things like wax tablets for kind of reusability, or writing on beech, various bark, or lead. If you're doing things like votive inscriptions, so for example, the Greeks and Romans would leave curses written on scratched lead tablets. But the book, and obviously you've got kind of papyrus scrolls as well. So, thinking about books and libraries, the Library of Alexandria, was filled with papyrus scrolls, and I think they did have some vellum, but it's the kind of the use of animal hide as a way of storing information is really the beginning of what we consider to be the modern book, and that basically occurs during the Roman period. But the book as an item of beauty in itself, I think, comes in during the late Roman period, specifically through basically the Byzantine and kind of post-Western Roman Empire. And it's often tied to Christianity as well, where important biblical texts were being grouped together and written down for storage by monks. So I've split this into two different halves. We've got a focus on the covers, and we're going to go through from around about 400 AD up until 1937 is the kind of the latest cover. But Dia, I didn't know if you had any other kind of little history facts about the books before we get started. My wheelhouse is slightly later, but I mean, certainly, of course, the substrate will become very important. What books are made with. Farah mentioned papyrus, which is it's an aquatic sedge. I think it's Cyperus papyrus, but it's found in the Nile Delta and in other places. It tends to grow in wetlands, and the Egyptians used it quite extensively as a medium to record and store information, as well as sort of paintings and drawings and such. So yes, papyrus will be supplanted as we see around the period that Farah is talking about with other substrates, the animal skins, animal hides, which will dominate books and documents well up to the 19th century in various ways. So the medium is the massage, so to speak, sometimes with books, and as different materials came to people, then there were. But it's remarkable how well papyrus ages. I've actually handled pieces of papyrus from the Middle Kingdom of Egypt, and it's amazing how they remain flexible. And
I have to ask the obvious question, folks. Why didn't they use paper then? At what point did they start using paper?
They didn't have paper. So
yes. So when did they start?
This is something we could probably get into. I mean, paper as you know it didn't really come in until I would say the late Middle Ages. So, but of course in a very different form. And then there was a great shift which happened at the beginning of the 19th century, which we can talk about, which also affected the printing of books and the longevity of books. But yes, paper, as you're talking about, was a relatively late invention. In other words, pulp. Rag paper, which was literally made from linen rags and later on cotton rags. So before that, things tended to be either inscribed on clay, or they were, as Farah says, they could be written on sheets of metal. They could be written on papyrus. They could be written on animal skins. But that was mostly the extent of it, and it was very, very expensive paper early on.
Yeah, and I guess that's another good segue, where these late Roman books would have been used only for the kind of the pinnacle of documents. So, like I said, liturgical texts obviously being super important, but again, often like one town might have a Bible, or there'll be like one or two in a small church, for example. The same in terms of like secular texts. Again, it was the preserve of like super elites. So in terms of maybe you have some philosophy, maybe you have some kind of there's a lot of kind of health. I'm thinking Galen, for example, or some kind of natural philosophy. Like science, basically science stuff, and as we'll see as well. So there's not many being produced. It's very laborious. Everything's handwritten, and so because these are such important and powerful items, it's and the actual kind of writing the text itself is very expensive. It sort of makes sense that they end up becoming these very precious and intricate items. They're used in terms of diplomacy as gifts, as presents for emperors. They're used as part of missionaries. They're used as part of training. So they have a lot of power, and so as we kind of go into this kind of early phase, you have a lot of these kind of liturgical documents being bound in a way which kind of shows the beauty of the book on the inside, on the outside. And so we've got our first example here. This is it's in the Milanese treasury right now, but it's like a post-Western Roman Empire, so the empire is basically kind of collapsing. I believe it's like a Germanic group, but you can see it's been fully adorned with these little scenes in ivory. So again, obviously ivory was very expensive back then, but they did have a lot of it. There was a long tradition, interestingly, of ivory carving in the Roman Empire. So specifically around consul diptychs. The consuls in Rome, when they were trying to go for public office and get elected, they would often produce these kind of large ivory plaques to kind of showcase who they are and what they're about. And this kind of carving tradition passed into Christianity. And basically you got a combination of scenes for the Bible in the middle. And you can see at the top, that's the three kings who are often depicted as Phrygians. You can see with the Phrygian caps. You got Mary sitting down with the Christ child, and then scenes from Jesus's life around the side, and then on the four corners you've got the four gospel writers personified. Although they're missing Mark's bull, so interestingly, I wonder if Mark is no, it's not Mark. I've gotten confused now. D has to help me out here. Luke is the eagle.
Yes.
Mark is the lion.
Mark is the. Listen to us. Mark is the lion. Who is the bull? Oh dear.
It's Matthew's the bull. Matthew's the bull, and then John is the angel or the person, basically. So they're in the four corners and in the wreath.
The incarnation. Yeah.
So, anything to say about this one, D, before we move on to the next one?
No. I mean, also, I think people may want to notice that Farah mentioned the idea of a diptych, which is basically a two-panel arrangement of paintings or carvings of this nature, which often were hinged, would open, and I think that idea was the sort of genesis of the modern book. This idea that there were kind of two containing surfaces that were hinged that opened in the middle, and this form was used for icons and paintings and all sorts of things. But then that became the kind of form of the book that took over from the scroll. I mean, obviously the scroll was I think an efficient way of storing that type of paper, but it was not the easiest thing to sort of handle or read.
Do you know what interests me about this? Is that the figures are all quite kind of lifelike in a way. They're fully rounded, and later on in the Middle Ages, I always think of the art as being like they're very flat men. That kind of flat Middle Ages style where everybody's like side on, or they're very two-dimensional figures. I'm kind of interested that in 450 AD, the I don't know, it was I wanted to use the word primitive, but it was kind of less. These were actual figures. I've never seen anything from this period.
Well,
before.
I mean, yeah, I think you're drawing too many conclusions from one piece. Of course, this is a carving, bas relief. Type of carving, so and of course you can find these in the Middle Ages as well in Europe and such, and sculpture sort of in the half round. I mean, like if you think the doors of the baptistry by Brunelleschi, in Brunelleschi's baptistry, you can see this type of carving in the round. I think there's a tendency perhaps to kind of compare it too much to the way that the figure was painted in 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 illumination and,
Well,
and in
I mean,
fresco.
I was always taught, Dee, that they like I don't know, can't remember exactly when it happens, but I've been like to the Vatican and to various places in where you put the earphones on and they tell you, but and it was like, oh, and here Raphael invented perspective or whatever it is, and it's like, well, this looks like it
Yeah.
has perspective to me. So
I mean, it's. But I think a lot of the modern narratives around like that kind of art history, I don't necessarily agree with.
No, they are very simplistic. Yeah.
That's it. I mean, what I would say is by this period, so as deep, just a point on sculpture. There's I guess kind of two ways of looking at it. You've got this kind of bas relief work where it's kind of like it's integrated as part of a panel or piece, or you sculpt in the round where you can think of it as you can go around the object fully, right? So I would say that by this period, in the round sculpture has definitely declined in quality. So if you think of something like in St Mark's Cathedral in Venice, they've got the there's like a porphyry statue of the four emperors, and I think that's like 375, and you can see that the quality is not as good as I guess kind of like early imperial Rome. But I would say that the quality is still very much preserved in this kind of relief carving. So they sort of, I think they lost the skills for in the round, but as you can see here, that it does maintain for quite a while, for several hundred of years. And also there is a differentiation between the West and the East, where the West, due to the Germanic invasions, definitely suffers a kind of a cultural shock for 400 years until I would say the Carolingian period, 800 AD. But those traditions are preserved through Byzantium and the Eastern Roman Empire, and do continue. But they sort of emphasize different aspects. They're not so interested in perfection of the human body. Think back to kind of how Spengler talks about how the Romans and the Greco-Roman mind is focused on wholeness and the perfection of the forms. While I mean, I don't agree with his take on the Byzantines, which he describes as the Magian culture. I see them as having a connection to the medieval world and the Faustian world, as maybe we'll see. But they emphasize different things, basically. They're less bothered about the form and more about maybe Platonic ideas of the form, like the perfect form that doesn't exist in reality. And so they're not as bothered about maintaining perspective fully, for example.
But I will say also that there was a lot of definite loss of technical skill. I mean, even the Romans never figured out a lot of the tricks that the ancient Greeks knew in doing sculpture in the round. When you look at many Roman statues are copied. I won't say many, but there's a lot of Roman statues that are copies of lost Greek originals, of which were often made out of bronze. And obviously, bronze is a prime candidate to be melted down whenever you need more swords or something like that. But we will often notice on Roman sculptures they never figured out how to make freestanding figures that didn't have very obvious support mechanisms. So often there will be like a kind of square block between the legs, or there will be an obvious kind of plinth next to the figure, because they again just didn't inherit the technical understanding of how to kind of work marble so that you could make a freestanding figure that wouldn't break at the ankles and fall over. So there was even degradation between the Greeks and the Romans, and obviously, as Ferrer says, certainly even further degradation after the Roman Empire.
Yeah, and I would say that in the round traditions are basically totally wiped out by about 600. Even in Byzantium, even in the Eastern Roman Empire, doesn't happen. But they are keen relief workers, and again, I think that leans well into ornamenting specific objects. It leans well into iconography and spaces as well. So a nice example to kick us off.
Sorry, Ferrer, I have to ask this question, which is how did this cover actually work? Does it like come out, or like
so it's integrated directly on? So basically you have basically 2 planks of wood on the face and the back, which is then integrated into a sheet of leather, and then where the spine is, that's where they kind of have the bindings, which are done in a similar way to like paper bindings, where they're clustered together into groups and effectively tied up in rows, basically. So you have a plank of wood attached to leather, attached to your pieces of string, which is attached to groups or clusters of parchment, and then on that external leather, these are like directly integrated. So you can see here, I mean, these are literally drilled in and then pegged over the top. I don't know if you can see on the top right, for example, around the eagle, there's a couple of little peg holes, basically.
Mm-hmm. Well, so in order to actually read this, if I was sitting down to read this cover, do you open it like a book, or does it come off almost like a kind of case? How does it work?
Most of these would be integrated, I believe, but some of them were you could physically remove them as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say that this one probably came off just because of I don't know the exact size of this, but just given the kind of weight of it. Now, also keep in mind that these were not books that were just casually read, while sitting in a chair. I mean, that these tended to be used in a kind of either a very special setting or as an object of veneration. These weren't things that people tended to page through. I mean, keep in mind, all up until the beginning of kind of printed books, movable type, books were extraordinarily precious objects. They cost an absolute fortune, so they tended to be owned communally, either in a scriptorium or, I mean, if you're talking about monks, or by temples or by extraordinary individuals. They weren't anything that anyone had a casual contact with. This type of book, a treasure book, was a very special thing. So don't think of this as just a volume someone pulls off the shelf and flips through it. They didn't work like that. So and an extraordinary fact is, of course, between this period, between Byzantium and the advent of movable type and printing in Europe, there were as many books printed in the first 50 years of the printing press than there were made in that entire period from Byzantium to the printing press. So, in other words, in the 50 years after the printing press, more books were made than were made in that entire 1,000-odd years, or however long it was. So, yeah, very rare and very special thing.
Okay, so this is just another example. This is a little bit later, 650, and this is from the Ottonian period. So this is kind of like where again, this is west like post-Western Romans. You've got the Germans coming in, and this is kind of like a Frankish Empire. Now, what's interesting about this kind of early period is the integration of like Roman stuff. So I don't know if you can zoom in on the surface here, but you may notice a series of cameos across its face. So those are the kind of sardonyx, like pictures. Like there's 4 of them on each. They're kind of like circular, with the faces. Now these would originally be Roman, which were then kind of reused and reintegrated. So this is kind of like, you got to think of the Franks as kind of picking through the ashes of civilization. They are another winter's people, I think, and they're kind of trying to. They kind of like look. They don't have the ability to produce something as beautiful as those cameos anymore, but they want to integrate it and attach it to objects of specific kind of power and beauty at the same time.
That'll be us in a few years, Pharaoh, trying to save trying to save the memory of the
it'll be our children, like attaching a phone to a necklace, like an iPhone to a necklace.
No, these were transcendent objects. It took until really the Renaissance for people to figure out how to carve these again. It's not easy if you look at these types of cameos in detail. And some of them were from like signet rings, so they were made. You could impress them into sealing wax, and they would produce a positive. So sometimes you'll see that they're kind of they're carved in reverse, basically. But and there was a huge zeal when the British started to go on the Grand Tour in the late 17th, 18th century. There was a huge zeal for collecting these. Every gentleman of the Georgian period would have had a collection of either ancient or modern of these. And sadly, of course, they went and picked them off of these books.
If you zoom in, you can see that I think there's a couple missing from here, but it's worth zooming in on some of the stones as well, because again, they have. I think what's interesting is like what we consider to be beautiful is slightly different. Sorry it's slightly different. You've got things like what they call rock crystal, which is quartz, and that being very precious, for example. While today that's considered to be very common, you've got things like pearls inside there. You've got amethyst. You've got some topaz. You've got sapphires. It's a very eclectic mix of gems. Now, can you just zoom in around the outside, because again, this is where you've got this kind of mix of kind of Roman styles, but I don't know if you could have noticed that these kind of the red garnet, and I don't know if they're familiar to you guys at all from any other objects.
Yes, well, there's. So is that corundum? Would that be the spinel that's in the imperial state crown?
Yeah. Well, I was actually more thinking some Anglo-Saxon burial sites, for example, use.
Yes, yep.
The Sutton Hoo Sutton Hoo hoard, for example. Now, so if you can zoom in just again on the border. So what you've got here is small pieces of garnet which are kind of interlocked around the outside, and behind each piece of garnet is placed a small piece of gold, and that helps kind of reflect it more. But what it is, it's an interesting mix of this kind of Germanic, that whole kind of garnet setting actually comes from the Caucasus. It's like an Iranian. It's like your proper Aryan design culture around the outside, which has then been mixed with this kind of new Ottonian Christianity, and then also fused with like slapping a whole lot of random old Roman stuff around the outside. So this is the culture kind of in mix. They're trying to find themselves, but I really quite like this this book covering. It's a nice, interesting mix of different styles. But
and later on,
let's move. Sorry.
Later on, they produced a different version of this type of work where they would put glass powder into these raised gold filigree, and then put it into an oven to melt it, which became medieval enamelware. Like if you think of Cloisonne and Champlevé and such.
Exactly.
So
yeah.
And much less laborious to produce than this.
Yeah, exactly. Each of those garnets has to be hand cut. So again, that's very, very intense. But let's move on to the next one. So this is a little bit later. Someone did mention the Lindau Gospels, and we've got them. This is actually the back face, and the reason why I've included it is actually for some of the kind of Germanic / Norse designs. So obviously you've got kind of different waves of the Christianification of Europe. You have like the Celts being Christian, and you can see that in kind of Celtic Christianity. We'll see some examples in the Illuminations later, but you've obviously got the Germanic Christianifications, and then the Nordic, the Vikings themselves becoming Christian. And if you can zoom in around some of these areas, you can see these patterns are automatically, you think of like the Yggdrasil world tree being kind of surrounded by kind of snakes in Norse and North Germanic pagan tribes here. So in those kind of four inserts, you've also you mentioned the kind of I can never say it right. Cloisonne. How do you pronounce it again, D? He's probably checking on his beans. But any of that? Can you see the kind of blue blue birds and the blue people here? So that's powdered glass which has been melted down and then set to kind of create a kind of little beautiful features. You've still got some of that red garnet coming through, as well. I think these were probably meant to represent the kind of four gospel writers here. So again, there's this really interesting kind of fusion of styles where you've got this kind of pagan Germano past here, fused or starting to kind of emerge into its new Christian form at the same time. Should we go to the next one, or any comments from you, AA? You're muted if you are saying something. No. Okay. So the next one is seemingly dull compared to everything else, and I wanted to kind of point out that actually not everything would have been caked in gold. Many manuscripts were just covered in leather. So it's only really the most important and the most powerful documents. But I guess what I would describe as a mid-ground, a mid-level tome would be covered in something like a Byzantine silk, and this is coming in from 1850. Now, the Byzantine silks of this period were highly coveted, and oftentimes people would try and sneak into Constantinople and smuggle them out. They were often used as gifts. They were worth more per pound than gold. And again, to us, we live in an era of technology and luxury, or like sort of luxury. We can produce this very easily, but to your standard 9th century noble, this would have been astounding. This is all hand woven on the loom using this kind of new material, silk, which has a shine to it. It kind of looks like something from another world, and again, seemingly dull to us. But for these kind of mid-level books, maybe it's not encrusted with jewels, but this was kind of like wrapping gold around a book in a different kind of way. So, but not many of these survive because the silk gets ruined in time. So they're actually kind of rarer than the gold books these days.
Yeah, you almost never see any of these surviving. The most common simple binding was just to bind the manuscript with another sheet of vellum. So you often see very early texts, again, ones that didn't have any sort of treasure binding, that will just have a simple undecorated vellum cover. So if you go to manuscript libraries.
Yeah, exactly. So let's keep on going. So this is 850. So there's not been much change. I mean, I wanted to include the Lorsch Gospels, which is again similar to that first one we saw. I mean, this just shows that there wasn't a huge kind of revolutions in art, if let's just say over 800 years. I mean, this is supposedly again meant to be another this is kind of Carolingian now, so this is kind of Charlemagne, etc. Supposedly it's Germans who did this. I'm pretty sure it's a Byzantine craftsman either working in Germany or maybe he had a school in Germany, etc. But if we zoom in, you got a series of plaques here that would sit on the front of the book. Again, this is all carved ivory, but again, I think the quality is surprisingly good still in the supposed Dark Ages. I mean, you're definitely moving away from these kind of classical forms, and you can start to see some of that kind of perspective distortion. So, for example, if you look at the feet of the left-hand figure, for example, here, that's done out of perspective right there. A fully perspective character, the feet would be more like a triangle shaped, if that makes sense. So you've almost got this kind of rounding of perspective to get that feet in. There are restrictions into what you like with carving as well. It's like you can't do faces very well in the small scale. So that's why you end up something like with Jesus's face. If you zoom into the Christ child, often they look kind of quite adult or disproportionate. That's a big sized head. I mean, part of the problem is it's just hard. If you were to naturally scale a baby's head there, you wouldn't be able to get the detail you need. So often they would inflate head sizes to be able to give the detail. So they're not bothered about realism in the same kind of way that we are.
Yeah, I want to jump in there and say that you want to avoid this sort of the kind of bias of modernity. I mean, it wasn't a priority for many of these artists to depict optical reality in a realistic way. I mean, that just wasn't the point of these. The point of these were often to, as we went along into the Middle Ages, the point was to show hierarchical relationships, or to sort of display, sort of allegorical relationships between these figures. It didn't matter, like they weren't trying to make them look real, quote, real. They were trying to show there were other values in play. Unfortunately, again, art history has been tainted by this idea that this was all primitivism working up to the great revelation of humanist
progress.
Renaissance, and then of course realism is the highest goal, which is something I battle with, trucks every day talking about these things. But I think it's important to remember, that these people, they had other reasons for doing these things, and there isn't that much room for perspective in these, because it's a figure sitting in a niche. But Ferro is right. I mean, you will start to see these things disappear, but I think that they just become a different sort of beauty.
I still think there's a lot of technical skill here. Again, if you zoom in on some of the clothes, for example, like the folding is done to a very high standard here, like as good as a one of those console relief carvings here. I mean, look at the clothes. What I would say is that, things like the hands and the faces are becoming more stylized now. But I think in my mind, this is an active choice. Look at the detail in the columns. If you want to do a realist hand, you could do, but there basically seems to be a certain style which emerges. I mean, I call them having like sausage fingers. Basically, they have these very curvy, rounded hands, and quite intense facial expressions at the same time. But like they have the skill. They do have the skill to do a realistic rendering. I see it more as a inheriting of tradition as well. And again, the way that they're taught is you can hand down from one person to another. And I think because of that, you just end up working in a certain style. But hopefully this is dispelling that that the Dark Ages didn't exist artistically. I mean, I'd say certainly in the round art, not as good, but this kind of relief carvings, this is 9th century now. This is kind of like still like 400 years before the Renaissance or whatever, still producing high quality technical works.
Yeah. Now also I would agree that things became programmatic, so it started to be as the decades wore on, that everything became very stylized, very programmatic, to the point where you start to just get these kind of, there's a typology of fabric, the depiction of fabric. There's a type, there's a way of doing heads. There's a way of doing hands that became, in lesser hands, perhaps a bit repetitive and a bit sort of desensitized from any sort of inspiration. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think it does get stale as well. It is inevitable, but in my mind, if you compare these to some of those console diptychs, which would be at the height of like Roman sculptural ability, these come out just as good, in my opinion. Let's keep on going though. So this is the last time we'll see some of these ivory diptychs. Now this this is technically not a book cover, but it is basically made by the same guys who would do these. This is Byzantine, I guess, kind of the high Byzantine style. So again, if you know anything about them, you've got the kind of early Roman period, then the Islamic invasions come and like Byzantium's wrecked, and then round about kind of like 850 to the 950. This is kind of like the big resurgence in Byzantine power. And they're producing, this is kind of like the middle Byzantine period, and they're producing works like this. Now, we mentioned that kind of enameling technique before. Like the Byzantines have perfected it at this period. They've also added in a series of other techniques as well. If you kind of zoom in on the major figures. So like I said, this is an icon, but they produce similar works to this for books. And the reason why I've chosen this, because it's like one of the best examples. This actually is currently in Venice in the cathedral treasury, and this is part of the spoils of the Fourth Crusade. So if you can see the face here, you can see it's made out of gold, but it looks like it's kind of coming out you at 3D. And actually, this isn't a cast piece. This is known as a repoussé, where they'll take a sheet of gold and hammer it from the front and the back to kind of create that 3D effect. so you can see that, look around the eyes, there's like a line that's been chased in with basically like a chisel and a hammer at the same time. So this is kind of a new kind of technique that was kind of used in the medieval period. But it's interesting to see, you know, it's 850. The Byzantines have already kind of are working with repoussé quite heavily. And you can, if you look at the wings, for example, this is using that enameling technique there, where ground up glass is being created to create those beautiful feathers, or the ornamentation around the outside. You know, we're sort of moving away from some of those eclectic jewels that are haphazardly placed, and they're being used to build up and to create the armor of the angel we see. If you can zoom into the right hand side above the wing there, you can see these little faces as well, and this is kind of like, again, shows the enameling skill. You know, you got some quite convincing renderings in enamel all the way around this piece here. So this is kind of like the peak of Byzantine craftsmanship. It's all about kind of color and intensity and an abundance of design, but I still think it's very powerful and very beautiful. And you know, I think we'd have had a lot more of these had the Turk not come into Byzantium, but you know, we have what we have. So
I should also point out with some of these covers, you know, we talked about being encrusted with semi-precious and in some cases precious stones, but no one knew how to cut stones so that they sparkle. You know, I mean, that came much later, because there's a whole sort of raft of tools that would have been required depending on the stone, and there would have had been understanding about how optics would work and how light would go through a stone and the type of faceting that you have to do. So it is very interesting, of course, to see all of these rubies and emeralds and sapphires, in some cases diamonds and such, looking in their natural state rather than in their faceted, you know, cut state. I mean, diamonds were not particularly valued until people figured out how to cut them so that they glittered and sparkled. You know, which was very late, even basically into the 19th century, before kind of modern diamond cutting became viable. So it is interesting to see these stones, you know, beautiful as they are, but they're not. If people are wondering why they're not glittery as modern gems tend to be.
Yeah, I mean, they're basically practically worthless today as well. So you can see like there's citrines there. I mean, these are very common and cheap gemstones.
Beautiful. I love.
Yeah, I mean exactly. I mean, it's about the color, isn't it? Like you said, it's like these are colors you cannot get anywhere else. And even like rock crystal was preferred to diamond. You know, that clear quartz for its clarity and for its kind of its malleability. So again, it's just interesting how some of that value's changed over time. But but one thing I would say is that the Byzantium heavily influenced the artistic path of the West, and much of like Charlemagne's reign was about kind of aping and copying the Eastern Romans, with him being, you know, the Holy Roman Emperor. You know, he's trying to do in the West what the Byzantines are doing in the East, and so they take a lot of kind of artistic leads from Byzantium. So this is kind of like what the East has managed to produce. Let's see what the West kind of replies if we go to the next one.
Also, I should point, I don't want to descend into trackishness, but someone said that last figure looked like Robert Zimmerman.
Yeah.
Okay.
I am here, honestly.
Okay.
Well, who looked like Robert Zimmerman?
The angel in the last.
Oh, the main guy.
Yeah.
I can see that, I suppose.
Yeah.
I was actually more interested in the kind of cartoon Jesus. These sort of, I mean, they were
All right.
they're kind of anyway. So it's going on.
Yeah. I mean, it is cartoonish because you're working in block color. You know, you can't do gradient. It's very hard to do gradients with enamel. You just basically choose one color. So it's a weirdly graphic medium. So it ends up, quote unquote, looking like a cartoon because
I mean, the comic strip. I think the comic strip came from the Middle Ages. You know, but we can talk about that another time.
Yeah,
I love this one.
Again, this is another Otto, but this is kind of like like post Charlemagne. I mean, what's interesting about this is it's just seemingly a random selection of jewels thrown up on the face again. But if you zoom out a second, I want you to step back and then try, like, you can see the bigger jewels creating a cross. So going from top down, left and right in the center. So it does feel a bit like a bit schizophrenic and a bit mad, but there is like a beauty and a harmony that has been created by the bigger pieces. Again, you can see another. I think that is one of the signet rings that Mr. D talked about at the top there in black.
Oh yeah.
There. So again, even into the 11th century, they're still kind of like salvaging the Roman past. So this is really 600 years of just trying to find themselves. And again, we're sort of entered into this kind of post ivory period where they still have like some carvings, but it's not. The skills are starting to go at this point, and they're being used elsewhere. But I like this for it. Again, it's just totally eclectic nature. It's just loads of random stuff thrown together, but it still works.
I have a great fondness for the accumulation. I love this idea of something that it seems less designed than just brought together. Brought together for similarity. So
the more you look at it, the more you can see some of the patterns and everything was placed there for a reason. It is definitely not haphazard, but it is that kind of like abundance, and it has a very kind of a naturalistic feel to it. In my mind, it reminds me of like a reptile skin or something like that, which has these similar patterns and deviations at the same time. So it's kind of feels very organic to me.
They're also a bit like collages. I mean, they were taking sort of pre-existing materials and sort of arranging. So it's a kind of weird sort of form of collage.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's an interesting way of thinking of it. Yeah. Okay, let's keep on going. So this is, I was mentioning rock crystal here. This is just another Germanic version. You've got the gospel writers here in as the kind of 4 ivory blocks, but in the center is a large rock crystal, which again, it I think in our age doesn't seem impressive because it just looks like a lump of plastic, a lump of perspex that's been polished. But again, you could only get stones this clear and this large in the form of like Middle Eastern rock crystal, and you can see there's a Jesus on the cross in the center of that. So it's that's a very large stone at the center. You can see some of that kind of like I wouldn't say filigree, but there's a specific name of it, the kind of ornamental kind of natural work, and that's done by beaded like rods of silver and gold, which are then kind of soldered directly onto a larger piece.
I would call that filigree work.
Okay, yeah. So again, yeah, I quite like the kind of simplicity, and it's almost kind of like a bit, a little less intense than some of the other works. And again, the kind of use of silver makes it very harmonic and very very simple. So
I like this one.
Yeah, and you had the 4 gospel writers there again. Something which is a bit of a mix of the two, and this is one which has been sadly heavily plundered. So they you can see the settings there, with the stones taken out. The 4 large plaques representing the gospel writers. So again, you can see that there's the bull which was missing last time, the eagle, the bull, the angel, and the winged lion. And I think these are scavenged bits of enamel and glass again. You can see that's the stuff that the looters has had left. But I thought it was interesting because you could sort of see how the fittings work, etc. And it's kind of each piece is created for the each stone in turn. It has a backing to it. Sometimes it's leather, sometimes it's like I said, gold to increase the shine, and then you kind of literally sort of like melt up the material around it, and kind of claw it into place there. So you can see the kind of little mini claws and the little hands holding it, holding the gemstones in place. But I like the panels on this, and this is 12th century now. Now I guess in my mind, 12th like the 11th to 12th century is super important because it's really the meeting between the East and the West in the form of the Crusades. And I think one of my theories is that the Renaissance really begins when the West goes to the East and sees Constantinople for the often for the first time face to face, and gets into contact with Byzantine culture in a big way. You got to remember that in Vasari's Life of Artists, it begins with like Greek Orthodox masters teaching the Italians again for the first time, and I always pronounce his name wrong. Kimberway. How do you say his name? D. Siambwe. Anyway, this first icon painter in Italy learnt from the kind of Greek masters, and that's sort of what's happening here.
I know a lot of the scholars fled from Byzantium when the Ottomans started turning up. I mean, the final moment is the Mehmed II and the fall of Constantinople, but they'd started coming over, I would say, at least 200 years before that. So
you got the Fourth Crusade, which kind of like wrecks it, like that's a significant event, and like you said, you get that kind of initial wave, but there are some hangers on. So like you said, it's kind of like an empire in decline from this point, and the West is kind of benefiting from that culturally. Okay, let's keep on going. More enamel work across here. One thing I wanted to mention was around how they're grouping the books. So again, a lot of these would be Gospels or Psalters, or like collections of books from the Bible. So you wouldn't have the full thing together. The Gospels would often be grouped together. The Psalters would be the Psalms, also very popular. So often there'd be kind of themes to the faces, which would match the internals as well. So obviously a gospel would have the gospel writers on the outside. If you zoom in a little bit, you can kind of see this is kind of like the West's attempt at some of this kind of enameling work here, where they're trying to create more kind of. Do you remember those Byzantine cartoon faces? This is 200 years later. That this is Germans using the Byzantine technique, and even after 200 years, it's pretty good, but it still doesn't have some of the kind of depth and quality of the kind of high Byzantine period. This next one was a bit of an oddity, in coming from the 14th century. And again, this is kind of little scavenged pieces of stone and marble, which have been set into place, and then combined with individual scenes which have been painted on the outside. And I thought this was a rather charming piece. From what I understand, the original pieces of marble were from a chessboard, like from a Roman chessboard, which they looted and then attached on. And they thought, this marble's very beautiful. Let's make an entire piece out of it. So they ended up having to create lots of different squares here, and you can see that it's a number of scenes from the Bible. You've got the gospel writers as animals around the center, and then the cross in the center is very unique. I've not seen anything else like it as well, but I quite like this. But we're starting to move away from the kind of Byzantine styles and into like the high medieval. So the way you want to kind of orientate yourselves is Crusades coming in at the 12th century. That's the kind of like a lot of what we see as the medieval period really is like 1200 to 1500 really. Now we're and like the West having its own kind of culture really begins, I would say, like the 1400s. So we're starting to kind of move towards that at this period. And if you go to the next piece here, this is kind of like obviously Gothic here by the 1500s. So Raphael is born at this point, and now we've got the kind of like Gothic elements, there's a definite feel and a move away from those kind of flatter Byzantine forms, and they're trying to kind of there's a combination of trying to rediscover Roman classical forms. There's a perfection in work. It's taken like 400 years, but if you see the kind of central figure here, the face, if you zoom in, is worked to a very high level. I mean, it's a little bit off perspectively, but there's some very strong realism here that the Byzantines never achieved, with the animals as well. That there's a re-emphasis on realism. I mean, maybe less so with the lions, but you have to forgive them for only having access to certain animals. But the quality is here. Also, look at the kind of ornamentation here as well. It's distinctly medieval, with things like the Gothic arches, the architraves and cornices all being used here, giving this a distinctly Western, like what we consider to be like Western Gothic. But it comes relatively late. People think, the medieval period, it's Gothic arches from 1200s. Well, actually, the Gothic arch itself comes in relatively late. So, but this is really, by this period, the West kind of stepping out and having its own unique feel. This is another German work as well. I would say that the majority of the works we've seen are also German or Italian. That's where the kind of power is in like the HRE, but the kind of the Italians start to come to bear as well at this point.
How on earth would you read this book? Because that is I imagine that's heavy, that front cover.
Yeah, this is also fairly small. This is not a gigantic tome, I don't think, is it, Farrow?
No, I think it's another gospel set again.
Yeah. So, but you wouldn't. This is not something you would sit and casually read. This was a treasure book. Still, they're still producing these. Although I would say this is starting to near the end of this type of binding.
Yeah. Maybe it's worth kind of talking about what's going on at this time. So you've got. Okay, there is some discussion as to like where does the Renaissance begin, what does it actually mean, etc. But like I said, Raphael at this point is born, but the Renaissance, in my mind, has been going on for like the last 200 years, where the West has made a decided effort to discover themselves culturally. This is kind of from I would say 1300 to 1500, or to this point, you've got the kind of Spengler's Spring, where the first seeds of the Faustian culture coming to kind of fruition and coming to show themselves, really. They're attempting to look to the past. So I mentioned about realism and looking to kind of Roman sculptures, but you can see even at this point here, they're not that bothered about I guess kind of like classical forms. These are distinctly medieval figures, and their poses as well. This is more like Gothic than classical, if that makes sense. But there is a big emphasis on quality, and also in terms of people spending on arts and cultures. Part of the reason why the Renaissance happened was because there's patronage networks which have been set up over a large period of time. There are you've got the kind of fruition of the guild system. So, for example, you wouldn't have the Renaissance without the guilds. Think about Ghiberti's doors, the famous Doors of Paradise in Florence. They were commissioned by the Cloth Merchants Guild. So it's a combination of artisans and like pathways for people to learn and to kind of get these skills from an early age, but also there were people who are willing to put cash out. Now, interestingly, I think ironically we have cash in today's society, but it's all going to the wrong people, to the wrong places and the wrong people. So there's a considerable amount of money being spent today on art. And compare ourselves to Florence as well. Florence was a time of plague, of war. They were a small city state. I would say we are spending as much money on art today as the Florentines were. So you got to ask yourselves, like, why aren't we producing any, like, the quality of art compared to that period? Well, it's because they had institutions, they had legacy, they had traditions they were plugging into. So, sorry, Mr. D, I know you want to jump in.
Well, you haven't seen my art, Pharaoh. No, Yeah, I agree generally with all that. I don't think I mean, it's very difficult to talk about the Renaissance because, of course, it's not an event. And I would agree with Ferro that the seeds of that began well before, Raphael, who is slightly overrated, but I mean, you can look back to Masaccio and Botticelli and such from from slightly earlier. And yes, and Ferro of course mentioned Ghiberti and Brunelleschi, which I stumbled around with. Ghiberti is the one who Ghiberti and Brunelleschi were competing for the commission to do the doors of the baptistry in Florence, and Ghiberti won out. But again, you will see in those doors, if you look at them, they're very much like these. They're of the form of these relief sculptures, but of course so much more advanced with new metal casting techniques, different ideas about massing and forming sculpture and such. But keep in mind, of course, with the topic of books, that in the background of this, more in Venice than Florence, was a revolution having to do with books, which was, of course, the advent of real movable type and the kind of democratization, for lack of a better word, of the printing and distribution of books. I mean, this is that period I was talking about, with the first 50 years of printing. And books from this era are called incunabula. So these are books that were printed from the very beginning of the advent of movable type into, what is now Germany and Italy, up until 1501. So, and as I said, that period, within that period, more books were published than had been published in the previous 1,000 years almost. So, had been produced. So that radical change was also happening in the background of all this. And why it all came together, I mean, there are many, many theories and many things written about economics and about, sort of territorial changes in the Black Death and the state of peasants and nobles. And I mean, I think that it's a confluence of things that sort of brought all this to bear. And there was a similar thing going on in the northern countries, which is usually called the Northern Renaissance. So with people like the Van Eycks and of course Johannes Gutenberg, famously often attributed a little simplistically as the inventor of movable type. But yeah, I mean, that was all going on. So a lot was happening between 14 and 1500.
Just before we move on, does this book open from right to left?
It does look like it's hinged on there, or it could be a clasp as well to shut it. I think this is the face.
It's clasped. Yeah, it's clasped. Those on the right. Yeah. Okay. And many books have them. We just very quickly. I don't know if you touch on this, Ferro, but I mean, in the when we're still in the kind of late medieval period, there are also. I mean, books were back when books were still handmade and handwritten. They were so extraordinarily valuable in libraries and in scriptoria associated with monasteries that they were often chained to the shelves. You will find many, many books from this period, many of those vellum-bound, simple vellum-bound manuscripts, sometimes with the iron hardware still attached. And another for millennials out there, if you watch the Harry Potter films, the forbidden section of the library in those, they actually got chained books. So it's a very interesting topic. You can just look up chained books to see some of these people are curious about that. But sorry for the cursed Harry Potter reference, but again, that is I thought that was quite clever. A lot of the kind of art direction in those films, they were very clever in bringing some of these things in.
Yeah, I don't want to get on too much of a Harry Potter tangent, but if you look at the directors of those films, there's something interesting about them. Just saying.
No.
That's all I'm saying.
All right.
That they lack people of a certain background. which is an interesting thing because there's a I don't know, there are some, maybe it's time for a reactionary reappraisal of Potter.
Well, I've always said that there's a definite reactionary strain, despite the politics of the authoress.
Of J.K. Rowling, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, but there was a deliberate decision to use mostly British technical staff and actors in these films,
and let's just say non-ethnic directors. How about that?
Yeah.
Let's carry on.
This is another. I guess you'd call this kind of high Gothic. This is the kind of apex of the Gothic style. And again, we've sort of kind of moved so beyond those kind of flat relief works now. You've almost got stuff in around here. If you can zoom in on those, they're almost like mini statues either side of that circle here. You can see that they literally are sitting in niches in the book. It's like it's so intense, and you've got the kind of arches above as well. That's all sitting above the work. So this would all be kind of cast bronze, then chased on the top, and then gilded on top. Can you zoom in on the figures, AA? Sorry. Yeah, it's hard to see, but it's almost like it's not flat. It's fully in 3D here at this point here, and you've got kind of the most ornamented and most detailed. I mean, that archway system at the top, I think, is really intense. It's almost kind of like. Just zoom in on that top part there. This is.
Sorry, go on.
No. All I was going to say, you can see it's kind of like two interlocking OG arches, and it's almost kind of like briars or thorns. It's just so naturalistic and woven together. But it's all based on like geometric forms which have been abstracted and ornamented.
Yeah, and you also see a very curious through line between even way back to those late Roman books, all the way up. I would even say today that there is a strange influence of architecture on both these cover designs and on the structure of the book, including very specifically the title page, the frontispiece of books. I mean, from the very earliest point, you will see this kind of idea of architectural forms, niches, architectural orders being depicted on the book covers, in the book, in the illustrations. It's very odd that very very long and very intimate relationship between kind of architectural imagining and the design of books. I've always been quite curious about that.
This one is special. This one. It's a very nice one.
Can you just zoom in on the corners as well? So again, you've got the iconography of the writers, but again, they're almost done in the round again. So that you can do like quite a flat relief, or you can do kind of like almost 3/4 relief, where you've got like part of the figure in and out. I mean, this was made in Ulm, which blows my mind because it's like a little tiny city. Mini country in the HRE, this kind of tiny Germanic city, and this is a masterwork, even for the period. But I think it basically marks the high point of the High Gothic and this kind of treasure binding style. I don't know if I did any other. If you go to the next one now,
a little rose window in the middle.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's you can spend an hour, hours. Yeah. That's a good point actually. It is like you said, like the apse of a cathedral. That is a good. If you zoom into the center, that the center looks like, if you go to Notre Dame, you can see this kind of rose window. I think the Gothic style is known as like flambe or something like that. It's like the fiery Gothic tracery there. It's kind of it's part organic, part like almost on fire, and like I said, it kind of marks the end of the Gothic. I mean, if you look at what's the time for this, 1506, the classic, the neoclassic or the kind of classical revival is in full swing in Italy now, and it's sweeping up. I mean, I think the Germans continued with their kind of Gothic ways for a little bit longer, but this really marks the end of manuscripts. These kind of vellum paged works, and also you've got the kind of Wars of Reformation. So there's a lot of stuff about to happen in Europe politically, which means that power is going to move away from the church. And again, it's the church who's commissioning a lot of these into the hands of a new elite. There's a circulation of the elites, and they're wanting different books. And I think that's another important point. Like Mr. D pointed out, there is a huge amount of ideas going on there, but there's a huge amount of writing, but people want books of a different kind. Now, as we kind of move out of this period into the 16th century, you get some very wacky examples. This is an embroidered book, so
not wacky. No, it's beautiful.
I'm personally not so keen on this embroidery, but this sort of harks back a little bit to. Do you remember that Byzantine silk? You can see here this is a silk velvet. So again, it's still highly luxurious fabric, but they've hand embroidered, like the ornamentation on the front, even the title of the book, and this is 1550. I'm not so keen on the actual design itself. I think the finish of the embroidery is a bit janky, but it kind of shows that people are producing this is a non-ecclesiastical and non-liturgical book. You can tell by the kind of crest and the ornamentation as well. People are wanting different books, and but they're still wanting them to be beautiful at the same time. So,
is this a history? Is it? Looks like a history to me.
I will say there were ecclesiastical books, because Elizabeth I's prayer book, an early one from earlier in her life, still exists with its embroidered binding. I can't remember where it's held, but if you look up Elizabeth I's prayer book, you will find it, and it has a very similar embroidered binding. And Mary Queen of Scots, of course, made a few embroidered bindings herself. There are embroideries which are used on books. She was keen. She had a lot of time to do embroidery.
Dark.
She did, one of my favorite bits of Mary Queen of Scots embroidery is that she did a little badge which it says a cat, spelled C-A-T-T-E. Amusingly, I like that. And it's an embroidery of a cat with its paw and claws on a mouse. And the cat is, let's just say, a very specific ginger color. She was literally making a statement about her relationship with Elizabeth, she being the mouse called under the paw. Very, very interesting that she dared to do those things, which is maybe why Eliza Regina decided to lop her head out.
So what we basically see from this point is a total move away from those treasure bindings, and like I said, I think the Reformation probably had the biggest impact on that. You've got like half of Western Europe breaking away from the Catholic Church, and all of that cash is going straight to a new set of elites, partly warrior, but also a lot of merchant elites as well. And as part of that, there's a new intelligentsia looking for new books and new ideas. So again, think of I always think of the character of Cromwell here. The one of Henry's minions, but he's the butcher boy who is highly intellectual. He's speaking to Erasmus. This is the age of ideas, and obviously this is all tied into the printing press as well. But because of that kind of move from these kind of high liturgical texts funded by emperors and the church, it's kind of think of it as kind of like there's a lot more books happening, but they tend to be like less ornamented. There's less focus on these kind of highly rich gold ornamentation, but there's a few things that are going on which are kind of interesting. I think the art of the embossed leather is perfected at this point. So obviously, like I said, leather binding has been happening for ages here, but even early on they realized that if you kind of steamed or wet leather and then placed a heavy object on it for a long period of time, it would kind of leave a mark, and that's the process of embossing. How they perfected it was through I guess the skill of design, but also with the use of gold leaf. And so you can see here, this is a nice little simple book here. Any of those kind of markings in the brown leather around the edges are from embossing, and then they've added some gold leaf. Just in terms of design, this is kind of some of the neoclassical ideas coming into play. You've got things like you describe it as kind of like Elizabethan strap work or something like that around the edges, and then these and then around the paulus, there's this kind of it's taken directly from like Roman fresco work. Arabesque is what they call it. Sorry, but there's a simplicity to it. We've moved away from these kind of over the top, almost kind of ridiculously ornamented books to something simple and something beautiful at the same time. So even though it's humbler, I think it has a lot of beauty to it.
And this style of binding remains today. We sort of settled on this. Right down to I don't know specifically because I don't know the color. I know how accurate the color is, but of course the classic red Moroccan leather binding with raised bands, and as Farah talked about, the punching and punch work and embossing. You still, everyone has seen books, modern books like this. So it is very interesting how once the style settled, it never left, And of course, the bind, so now what separates, the peasant from the not so much peasant, but separates the pleb from the aristo, often becomes this binding, because of course once the proliferation of mechanically printed books, of course, takes the world by storm, especially and certainly it did in England and Britain. You would buy your book without a cover. You would buy basically the text block with a simple paper cover, and then you would keep it that way if you were someone of little means, or you would send it to a bookbinder if you were someone of lots of means, who would do again a binding that's suitable for your library's decorative scheme and your pocketbook. So
I think we think of everything as these kind of like commodified objects, but I think there's a lot more kind of customization and like you said, people want to leave their own marks on it, or again, like feel like and people would collect their own like sets and put things together and to match the bindings to that as well, which I think if you go to any old book section in a library, you can find several books of the same kind, even of the same printing, with different bindings to it, and that continued all the way to the late Victorian stage, I would say.
So, the books, almost no books came with their own binding. So occasionally they would have been bound by the same person. So I have some books from the early 17th century that have that retain their original binding, which is somewhat it's rare in certain cases, because the binding would wear out, and be replaced. Victorians were notorious for just replacing all the bindings of some of these early books. But I have some intact bindings from slightly later than this period, and it is curious because, of course, I have looked up other copies of the same books in libraries, and they have very similar bindings. I'm sure they were done by the same person. So, but what happens, of course, was the bookseller would often be connected to a person who did binding, or they would have their preferred binder. So you could buy your book and then say, send it off to whoever, and so they would often end up with some of these books that had similar bindings.
I was going to say, someone in the chat said that this reminds them of an old pub. I can definitely see what he's saying. You could your classic old London pub. They had a lot of this kind of thing. You still see them in some places in London.
What you mean, like the strap work and all that?
I mean specifically the this pattern here around the around the writing. That's very similar to the dominant kind of London pub, or not just London pub, any old pub. They like that,
It should also be noted that around certainly in the in the 16th century, often interior design would use this embossed leather. So there are in fact some very rare survivals of this. I know that there's some pieces from Hampton Court that was found somewhere, which was basically leather frieze work, embossed leather frieze work that was used on the walls, and it was done elsewhere as well. The Low Countries, you often see Dutch paintings from the 17th century where you see this same sort of work, embossed, pressed leather, being used to kind of tile a wall. So again, that connection between architecture and books remained quite literally.
This is a kind of a similar example. I wanted to include this because this was actually a collection of Da Vinci's works done by another artist, a sculptor called Pompeo Leo, 100 years later. So again, it's not just, I guess, kind of like fully completed books that are bound and stored as books, but also, individual leafs and collections of manuscripts. And I think what's interesting in this period is that there's a big move to collect and group and to categorize stuff together in a way that, again, I think would be foreign to us. We're just so used to just buying this kind of completed object off the shelf, while maybe you're collecting another artist's drawings, etc., and then you put it together into a folio, and then you would turn that folio into a book. But again, this, if you can zoom in on the front here, I think it's got some really nice embossed detailing. Yeah, I mean, it's harder to see there.
It's slow res the image.
Yes, yeah, sorry. But you can see that there is a simplicity to it, but at the same time, I think there's a refined quality. So maybe not as extravagant in terms of materials, but in terms of technique and skill, I think it's very beautiful.
I have to mention my favorite example of this sort of thing, because I think one of the more famous examples of a collection of someone's works being released as a book is Shakespeare, of course, right? Little bit after this, but my favorite example is Ben Jonson, who brought out his own complete works, and it's got a really. Let's see if I can find it. He wrote an introduction to it, and he's on the front, and I see if I can find that cover a second.
One thing sorry. Well, I wanted to mention the other thing that, of course, people may want to understand is the way that books were sized. So you will hear these terms like folio and quarto and octavo and such, and these refer to how so a full sheet of paper, how that was printed on and folded to form the signatures or gatherings of a book. So a folio, which is from Latin, from the word leaf, you would print by printing 2 pages on each side of a full sheet of paper, which is then just folded in the middle to form 2 leaves or 4 pages. That's a folio. And then, of course, the octavo, or the quarto was folded into fourths, hence quarto. Octavo was folded into 16 pages. So anyway, and books were that was the size of books. So there were sort of standard sizes. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, this was a bit later than the image you had up, Pharaoh, but and it's the inside cover rather than the outside cover. But can you imagine just the sheer balls to bring this out? He brought this out himself. He got it commissioned. The works of Benjamin Jonson with a kind of full classical.
We're gonna do this. We're gonna do this when you finish your trilogy. I wanna do a folio edition of the AA trilogy, and we'll do a ridiculously over the top. D can do this ridiculously over the top etching on the first page with you as Apollo or something like that on the front cover. What do you think?
I think it's an interesting example, the Ben Jonson thing, of a new type of person, though. This is a bourgeois, essentially, a middle class social climber, someone who's very self-conscious of their status and things like that.
Yeah,
who
we go
wanted
from
this
the
to come
anonymous.
out, you know.
Yeah, we go from the anonymous worker working to serve God, you know, in these early times, to the individual, you know, in this period. We don't, again, we talk about illuminations and we talk about these early panel paintings. We almost never know who it is. It's the master of the cycle of, you know, whatever, or it's you know, obviously an illuminator or whatnot. And then suddenly in the Renaissance, we're talking about Raphael and you know, Donatello and all the other Ninja Turtles. So
I don't know if that Ben Jonson one is the first example of someone who prominently wants their own name on the front of the book, but it's I mean, I think in the history of English literature, it's certainly one of the first examples of someone saying, like, listen, it's me, I'm the star writer, you know, look at me, remember me.
Interesting.
There were I mean, basically, as soon as books became a mass market item, there were people doing that. So you get people, even in people published by the Aldine Press earlier, you know, in Venice, you get people who very much wanted to.
Yeah, there's a kind of there's almost like 100, maybe even 200 year lag between Italy and England. You've got to remember that they look to Italy for everything. In this period, you know.
Well, and you know, of course, printing. I mean, we didn't get printing presses in England until William Caxton brought them in, I believe, something like 1470s. So,
yeah, that's about right. Yeah.
And of course, we used a different type because it just so happened that some of the typefaces he brought were Germanic in origin. So that's where the kind of tradition of using this modified black letter in early British printing came from. We didn't use Roman type until later on, or Venetian type.
I've got another embroidered one here. I think this one's a little less, a little bit more skillful than the previous one, but again, kind of shows this kind of nice embroidered red velvet. And again, I think, you know, these are becoming personal objects as well. I think going back to Dee's point around, you know, Mary Queen of Scots creating them as well. You know, to have ladies of court and ladies of leisure producing them. So I think that the book as an object has sort of changed position, like you said. Yeah, it's becoming increasingly bourgeois. It's accessible. It's more personal. I also feel like all of a sudden, you know, anyone could go to the printing press and get their ideas amplified as well. So, you know, it's expensive, but it wasn't like insanely expensive to do a run, you know. So I guess it's kind of like today, you know, someone like yourself can go out and get their book published, and I think it's, you know, very revolutionary, unsurprisingly.
There's weird parallels between today, of course, because suddenly it's back again to all these small presses and individuals, you know, printing things, you know. So I mean, you look at many books, the title page or the frontispiece of many books from this period, and you'll see, you know, published by W. Blunt, you know, at the sign of, you know, the cross at you know, whatever. I mean, very specific individual publishers. You know, it wasn't
Fleet Street. It's always Fleet Street and
big publishing houses. Well, and of course, you know,
it's usually a bloke's name in my experience.
Oh, it's almost always a person's name. So, I mean, for instance, Shakespeare's first folio is Isaac Jaggard and Ed Blunt, I believe. Although it doesn't give the location. Usually books in this period will also have the location. And this was a bit based on an act of Parliament. They had to do this, and of course, you had to register yourself as a publisher. You couldn't just, you know, just do this out of the blue.
Yeah, I mean, there was censoring. There was some
very early censoring. Yeah,
it does sometimes mention who the typesetter was as well on some of those early. I seem to remember it sometimes mentions who did the typesetting. D. I don't know if you've come across that.
It won't usually. I've never seen a typesetter mentioned. I've seen a printer mentioned. So I don't know.
Okay, I'll have a look to see if I can find some examples, but we'll have to do it later. All right, let's carry on.
Okay, now we're going to move into the next century. I mean, we can skip over this one because it's kind of similar to some of the others, I think. As we move into the next century, basically technology, the presses improve, the number of countries that have them improve as well. So I think you start to get this kind of stratification of the quality of books, and specifically the introduction of fabric bindings again. Think again all the way back to that Byzantine silk bindings, but instead of expensive silk fabrics, you've got inexpensive cotton fabrics. So if you zoom in here again, this is a bit of an optical illusion, but this is a it's like a half gingham basically cloth, which is then being embossed as well. So they embossed the fabric, and then some of it's been inlaid as well. I mean, this is a designer's nightmare. I think this is kind of like looks like the birds in a prison or something like that.
Yeah.
But
this is the 19th century book. This has to be much later on.
Yeah, 1840 it says here.
Yeah.
I think we've missed. I think that's got mixed. No, we have skipped ahead to Victorian.
I was going to say, we skipped about.
Sorry. I think when I was looking, the 18th century was very much more of the same. So this is kind of like your mass manufactured books. You've also got the kind of introduction of polychrome printing as well. So this probably isn't gilded. I think this was just printed. If you zoom in on the text, etc. And machines are taking a lot bigger part in the production. Basically, there's less. It's less a guy carving out some wood, and more kind of like using a precision machine to.
Well, one question I have, Pharaoh, is how far away is this book from, let's just say, your typical Folio Society book today? In terms of the techniques they're using and things like that.
Yeah, more similar. Basically, the Folio Society is basically like Victorian Book Society, really, isn't it? It's all of the styles are like often they will literally crib from the like Victorian books that have fallen out of print, so they can steal the designs from like all of the they have that kind of fairy tale.
Yes,
series.
yeah.
Like some of those are literally just like Victorian books that they've redone, and they're cloth bound with. I mean, they don't use gold, obviously, just like a metallic ink or whatever. So, I mean, these are still lovely, but these would be considered to be cheap. And actually, I can't get away with the stream without talking about Ruskin. Ruskin had a big rant about cloth bound books and how disgusting they were. And your gentleman would not be seen dead with a cloth bound book. It's leather, or it's only leather, basically. So this is kind of like your middle class and your aspirant working class. This is like the 19th century is like books for all, and it's through cloth bindings that allowed it, basically.
Well, and these, of course, this was the beginning of the era where books came with their own binding. They came down with
a product there, yes, yeah.
And of course, most books from this period, you will find them. If you find them, they're falling apart. And we can talk about that later on if there's time. I don't.
Yeah, exactly. Like the quality drops. This is the kind of era of mass production now.
I have a couple of rhetoric books from around this time that I literally bought for Foundations of Rhetoric, because I just couldn't find these textbooks. So I've got one that's like literally from this era, 1840, and you're right, Dee. It's very difficult to read that because it's literally about to fall apart. In fact, I've also got a rhetoric book by Vico. More famous for the New Science, but he was also a rhetorician, and one of the sources I used for Foundations of Rhetoric was Vico himself. And again, I found a very old edition of it from around this era, and it's the same thing. It's like, they are falling apart at the seams, quite literally. So
yes,
maybe you can explain
because the fabric binding is very weak inherently, and of course around the turn of the 19th century, there was a massive change, which was the move from rag paper, which was literally made from linen or cotton rags pulped up and then made into paper. So to wood pulp, lignin, cellulose paper, and which is of course made of wood pulp. It's a completely different type of fiber. It has completely different characteristics, and it's inherently far weaker than rag paper. So once that change was made, you will start to see books in the 19th century where the pages go very yellow and brown. They get very brittle. They will literally just break and fall apart. It depended upon who was making them, where the paper was made. Occasionally you would get better kind of production than others, but in general the quality, there was a huge decline in quality. And of course the bindings were also made of this paper, and of course it often had free acid left in it. This was not buffered paper, so that free acid would start to kind of eat away at the sewing of the signatures and such, and or the cloth, the adhesive of the cloth to the back, to the boards, and the book will just they will crumble and fall apart. So you can actually, almost any 18th century book, I mean, if it was well kept, you could just pick it up and page through it. Whereas books from this period, you've got to be very careful with. So
let's carry on.
You've also got the rise of two things during the Victorian period. The certainly in the West, that is the Gothic revival. So we're kind of moving out of this kind of neoclassical phase and into looking at the medieval period as the most important culturally. But you've also got a lot of weird novelties, and I quite like this. I think it's quite ugly and quite charming at the same time. This is actually like a 3D relief book, but made of paper mache in a kind of quasi Gothic style from the Victorians. And this is all about the coinage of Britain, basically through time. And you can see this is one large coin, and you've got these kind of like it looks like some of that kind of bas relief or some of that kind of high Gothic. Remember the Ulm book, sort of similar. But as you can see, this is not. This book is literally falling apart because it's just made out of crap paper. So it was just a pure novelty. But I think it's quite entertaining, and there's a couple of books like this during this period as well.
Let's see if I can find that book. Sounds interesting. Coinage of the British Empire. Okay, carry on. Oh look, you can buy one for £650. Pharaoh,
please buy a mega bundle right now to fund.
You can buy like literally this. What we're looking at, you can buy for £650.
Yeah,
from Airy and Harrington Rare Books.
Can I just say that collecting books is actually, I think, I don't know, maybe this is just my bourgeois privilege, but I think it's very achievable, and you can get good quality books for like hundreds of pounds. Like, obviously, like good quality artwork, I would say is thousands plus. But if you're looking for something, if you're looking to collect something that's very nice, stuff like this is definitely achievable, and certainly from the Victorian period.
The author is Henry Noel Humphreys, FYI.
There we go.
All right, so I probably won't be buying it though, because I actually like to read my.
Yeah, that's true.
I have a functional working library,
yes,
so
yeah.
Books I can't read are a pain in the ass.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
Books are meant to be read, and I think that's where this one falls. If we just keep on going. Oh, sorry, Dee. Do you want to?
No. Go on. I mean, if we have time, I brought a couple of books that I wanted to just point out a few things from these various periods. So, but go on.
We can do it now.
Okay, just very quickly then, just to show you that you can. I mean, this is a book. This is got the original binding. It was printed in 1678. And I like this book because it's an art book. It's a basically art training for the beginner.
Did you send it to me, Dee? Sorry.
I know. I'm holding it. I like this is a book that I own.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah,
but the book is actually called Polygraphica, and it's by a man called William Salmon, who is a very interesting character. Slightly, perhaps shades of a Mountebank. he also published a book on surgery. So to give you an idea of maybe a bit shady. I don't think I'd want an art book provider to write my surgical textbook. But one of the things I love about early books is the title page. So I just want to read the title page, the title of this book. Polygraphica, or the arts of drawing, engraving, etching, limning, painting, washing, varnishing, gilding, coloring, dyeing, beautifying, and perfuming, in 4 books, exemplified in the drawing of man, women, landscapes, countries, and figures of various forms, the way of engraving, etching, and limning, with all their requisites and ornaments, the depicting of the most eminent pieces of antiquities, the paintings of the ancients, washing of maps, globes, and pictures, the dyeing of cloth, silk, horns, bones, wood, glass, stones, and metal, the varnishing, coloring, and gilding thereof, according to any purpose or intent, the painting, coloring, and beautifying of the face, skin, and hair, the whole doctrine of perfumes, never published till now, together with the original the original advancement and perfection of the art of painting, to which is added a discourse on perspective and chiromancy, the 4th edition, with many large additives, adorned with sculptures the like never yet extant, by William Salmon, Professor of Physics. London, printed by Robert Waite. I don't have my reading glasses here.
Is that Robert Waite, or is it Robert, Waite?
It's Robert Waite. London, printed by Robert Waite for John Cramp at the sign of the 3 Bibles in St. Paul's Churchyard, and to be sold by Charles Passenger at the 7 Stars on London Bridge. So
it's wonderful.
That's the title page of this book. And this is very common if you look through books of this period. Well into the 18th century, they did this. And yeah, this is a book that tells you how to do all those things. I mean, it gives you a good idea, of course, that to be an artist, especially kind of a lower level provincial artist, you had to know how to do all those things, because of course you're not always going to get portrait commissions. People aren't going to want to buy your landscapes all the time. You've also got to be prepared to color in maps or paint someone's linen chest, or even, of course, humorously at the end, how to do ladies' makeup and to read their palms. So this is a very expansive definition of the character of the artist. But again, this book is from 1678, and I can just freely page through it. The paper is perfectly sound. This binding, which is of course from the same period, is perfectly fine. And again, a much later book, a book from the early 20th century, you couldn't do that with it. Anyway, sorry for the divergence. I thought we should mention it. One other book here before we go on, which has a beautiful binding. Full Moroccan with gilded stamping, and wonderful marbled paper in the middle. Everyone will know this book. This is Paradise Lost, a poem in 12 books. The author John Milton, from the text of Thomas Newton, D.D. Birmingham, printed by John Baskerville for J&R Thomson in London, 1758. So this is a famous edition, and Baskerville was very important to the history of printing. Type and also other things. Again, we can get into this more thoroughly in another stream, but and this is a beautiful book. I mean, whenever I reread Paradise Lost, I read it from this book because the type is so beautiful and so easy to read. But again, this book is without ornaments of any kind. There isn't a single ornament. All the design is just the type. So this was a big change, of course, from all the wonderful, kind of excesses we saw before this. And again, beautifully, perfectly readable because again, this preceded the advent of wood pulp paper. Also, this book would have been printed I mean, Baskerville and a lot of printers like this would reprint old texts that were out of copyright, so to speak. And the idea was that everyone would want a luxury edition of Paradise Lost, and so I can make money producing a luxury edition, of course. And these were sold by subscription, so there's a whole list of all the subscribers in the front. So again, this was not done on speculation. He literally went out round and said, okay, how many do you want? Do you want to buy one of these? And then printed them to order. So it was
print on demand if you want.
Print on demand. And of course, the having your name amongst the subscribers. I mean, if you go through it, it's all His Grace the Duke of Argyll, the Right Honourable Earl of Aylesford, so and so and so and so. And I should note, one Ben Franklin of Philadelphia.
Interesting.
Cool.
Very interesting.
Anyway, sorry for the divergence, but I think it's very interesting and and luxurious, but very, very plain bindings.
Yeah, lovely. Returning to this one, we're kind of like in the mid-Victorian period, and again, this is kind of like, again, the real mass education, but also, I mentioned about the kind of the folio style books. This is where they come in, where, it's about selling the books as well. This idea of we need to create a marketable product that can sell to people in large quantities comes into play. So I think this is the period where you kind of the large eye-catching cover and interesting spine comes into play. So previously we've seen relatively low-key spines. They're very functional. Now you can see, look at this. There's a little boat on the Nile boat. These kind of beautiful Egyptian designs, etc. The whole point of this is to get that sale from that middle class factory clerk. He's got limited cash. He's going to spend it on a couple of books, and this is going to be it. There's also a huge increase in the amount of it's like useless writing. Like novels and frivolous stories. Everything in the past has been focused on philosophy or medical or physics or important stuff. I think there's a massive explosion. I mean, this really happens in the last century, but continues further in the Victorian period. Novels really take off and are very widely read. So this is the book as its kind of lowest form to date. This marketing product. That's how I see it.
It's by W.H. Bartlett, if you're interested. It's called The Nile Boat, or Glimpses of the Land of Egypt. So I'm guessing it's a travel book, which was a huge genre in the Victorian era.
Yes, yeah. Again, it's kind of like this is for not the class who would go on the grand tour, but those who wished or wanted to know more about it. So again, this very middling sort book.
I hate to say it, but I love these books. I think they're really, they're really nice in their own way. And occasionally you can find one. Sorry about the dog. Occasionally you can easily curl up and read one of these books, and some of them, you've never heard of, but they're quite good. So you're right in all these changes, but I think these have their own beauty. As difficult as they are.
It's a lower order, though. I think, in my opinion. But anyway.
Yeah. It's a lower order, but it's still there was this great concern for the beauty of the product.
Yes, yeah, that's true. And technical skill. Sorry.
This is very, very reminiscent of the Folio Society books, by the way. I mean, to the extent where it could be one. It's got the. I mean, all of these are the kind of. I don't know. I've got tons of them on my shelf here. This is what they go for in a big way. Is the gold and the. I'm with D. I kind of like it myself, but yes, I take your point that it's not transcendent or whatever.
It's just decline. Let's keep on going. Interestingly, towards the kind of end of the 19th century, you get this kind of refocusing on, I guess, kind of back to the past and about the craft of books. That like the Victorians have lived through 50, 60 years of industrialization, this kind of mass manufacturing of books, and so there's a certain class of person who's now looking to say look at that beautiful Ulm book. They still had access to it, etc. How can we recreate that? And so you've got these kind of neo-Gothic movements coming in, and I think this is quite an interesting early example of trying to place craft back in the book creation. This is by a specialist German manufacturer or German craft company, and you can see, can we zoom in on the book a little bit in terms of like some of the things they're doing. Well, look, you can see there's some of the filigree work we saw previously. You've got the enameling returning as well. You've got this relief, kind of sculptural relief. Interestingly, in my mind, it doesn't really look okay. It's kind of like taking the elements of Gothic and then reimagining it. And I think you've got to remember with the Victorians, they are an eminently romantic people. They're kind of taking the threads of the past and reimagining it in a very beautiful and structured way. Just gone are the kind of haphazard gem placements, and everything has a place and everything has a purpose. It's very ordered and structured, even though it is has those kind of elements of Gothic to it.
I just wanted to say that this period always makes me think of the Albert Memorial in
Hyde Park,
Kensington Gardens. Yeah, I mean, if you're ever in London, it's extraordinary work. I actually read a very old book about the creation of that and what went into it and the various triumphs and disasters. It's been recently refurbished,
cleaned or something. Yeah.
I mean, it looks as good as you're ever going to see it. So if you're ever in London, you want to take a look at it, or obviously Elizabeth Tower at Parliament, which has also just been cleaned. It's very much this aesthetic, the kind of Gothic transformed, and some of it is so over the top. But again, part of me, I really like it.
I was just going to say that a copy of the Nile boat, the one that you had, you can probably find for around 60 quid, but it typically is sold as part of a lot. As this W.H. Bartlett sold, he wrote a number of travel works, and the Nile boat is one of 4. So they typically get sold together for about £812. So just if you're interested. The Nile boat can be yours for a small sum. All right, carry on.
So this move, sort of like rediscovering the past, kind of countering the these kind of industrial works, kind of continues from this age. But also you've got the kind of like the apex of if you go to the next piece, the apex. Do you want to say something?
Who is it? Well, I was just going to say I was anticipating this.
Well, no, well, it's not quite yet the one you're thinking of. But if you go,
I don't have any more. Hold on, it's not. It won't go any further. Hold on.
Maybe it didn't load up. Hold on. I'll go back to the Google Drive.
Having a look. No, there are more. It's just not going further. All right, I'll just start. I'll just open it afresh. Sorry. Here we go.
How is it?
It's not quite yet. This is, in my opinion, is the kind of peak of this kind of these like high Victorian books, and this is the House Beautiful. It's one of the first like interiors books, but you can see this really beautiful kind of inlaid gold leaf, and I really quite like this. This is the kind of my kind, like out of those kind of style of books, my favorite style. This is kind of like they call it aesthetic movement.
That's a great looking book. Yeah.
Now, kind of following on from this previous idea about handcraft, I think there's an important stepping stone to some of the other ones later, and that's if you go to the next book. This is this is produced by a group called the Century Guild, which was one of the kind of early quote unquote arts and crafts style businesses, and this is 1884. And what they were trying to do is to again go back to hand produced books to kind of counter the industrial books. And so these guys produced a magazine called The Hobby Horse, which is, it's all hand pressed, it's all on handmade paper, it's all woodcuts as well. So again, I mean, we'll in the illustration section, which will have to be another stream, I think. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But basically, this is trying to kind of recapturing some of that kind of medieval spirit in the book form itself. So gone are these kind of over the top fussy Victorian like maximalist covers, and you've got this kind of like return to simplicity. Let's keep on going. So I want to just keep the speed up. Here's another example of this. This is the Studio, which is kind of like an arts and crafts magazine, and this was cloth bound, but this is more kind of like I would say this is the kind of first like truly like modern graphic style cover. So again, this is a cloth bound printed book, but can you see how again all of that kind of etching fussiness has been simplified? You've got these kind of larger woodblock style prints to give it the so-called graphic effect. You know, like I would describe kind of like a graphic book with its line thickness. You know, so etching often has these kind of very thin lines which build up depth and tone. With a graphic style, you have these thicker lines. They tend to be kind of block color as well. And this was I think it's a Voisier or a Crane that did this cover, but I think it's quite charming.
Taking a page from also a very early book, which is called the Hypnerotomachia Polyphili, which is a famous, very elliptical, esoteric illustrated book from way back in the late 1400s, which has illustrations that were certainly very influential on these Victorian artists.
Yeah, and I think this kind of period shows that they're kind of looking and thinking about the like graphic design in a more like analyzed sense. In some ways, you know, we talk about, you know, Spengler's Socratic man. This is sort of Socratic art, I think, in some ways. Everything we've seen previously is kind of like organic. They've just sort of done things, while this is an attempt to sort of recognize the past and to deconstruct history and to put it together in a new way. I mean, again, I think it's very, very beautiful, but it's very self-knowing and understanding itself. This is the kind of this is the beginning of modernity right now, and kind of modern works of art, which kind of actively sort of build up something out of nothing, really.
This is going to be very controversial. I prefer the Victorian covers to the earlier ones. Just more interesting to me. All the other ones are just like pictures of the four Gospels and like there's Jesus again in gold. Brilliant. This is my. I've said this before. I don't know. Things become more interesting because they talk about other stuff rather than just the same thing like over and over again. No.
Yeah. Well. Yeah.
No,
there is diversity of subject. Diversity of subject is interesting because you can explore different things, and I think there's definitely truth to that. But I think in terms of the craftsmanship and the you know, like the amount of hours and the beauty, that kind of high Gothic period is like just can't be beaten. Although I do like some of the gemstone stuff.
I mean, my position is why not both? You know,
that's true. This is
in both, but yeah, I mean there is a difference.
Kind of following on from the kind of growth of modernity. If we go to the next slide, there's another iconic
amazing
book, the Yellow Book, which involved Beardsley famously, and that's his design on the front. What I love about this, again, this is another cloth bound quarterly, similar to the Studio, but it's an attempt to you know, really shake things up, both in terms of its design. You know, I mean, the yellow choice itself, and it's kind of like this. It's this sort of like mega intense mustard yellow as well. Is like so obnoxious, but it's so powerful at the same time. So this is kind of like a shot in the air. This is, but this all comes out of the Studio and the Studio stuff. This is about like trying to create a scene and to make a big noise, but it's done in that simpler that simpler graphic style that I mentioned that comes out of the Century Guild as well. So you need it's just sorry.
This is my favorite cover so far, by the way. It's amazing.
I've got some temporary editions of the Yellow Book, and they really are this amazing color. But I will say Beardsley is wonderful, but he is a deeply
subversive figure. Yeah, he is. Yeah.
So you can look up some of Beardsley's illustrations.
I might take that Mars figure on the right as my new avatar. I like the idea. Maybe Roland Rat can become him. You know?
This Venetian mask, yeah.
God's sake.
So just at this period, you've got lots of different design movements and design groups. That's why I'm saying this is kind of like true modernity, because rather than an organic outswelling or crystallization of culture from the people, you've got little groups within a similar culture all trying to do different things. So this is kind of like again, this is sort of coming out the aesthetic movement. Yeah. On the I just want to quickly rattle through these last ones, if that's okay. So
that's Lizzo, by the way.
That is a bit of a Lizzo figure. This is Morris's attempt at creating books. So his Kelmscott press. He comes to book printing very, very late. You know, like Morris & Co. was founded in 1855. So this is like right at the very end of his career. And again, he is like the most returner. You know, the ultimate trad daddy out there.
Yeah.
You know, he's doing this proper medieval style vellum book, while previous Gothic stuff is like trying to like ape it or to create a romantic version. He's trying to create this real true version, and I really love this. This is just like a simple vellum or leather backed tomb. But then look at all of the embossed and engraved detailings on it. I think it's
exquisite work.
This is the answer to that kind of fussy Victorian front covers that you love so much, AA. This is kind of like it's so simple and so harmonic, and I think very, very beautiful.
Well, sorry to bring down the tone again.
And the interior of these books were
exactly.
Sorry to bring down the tone again, but are those slices of cheese around the rim now?
Okay.
I mean, is that these slices of cheese? What are these meant to represent?
They are graphic leaves. If you just zoom in closely,
slice of cheese.
It's part of that kind of this is actually quite modern. Like it's a modern interpretation of like natural forms, and like Dee said, it's kind of repeated in the center. But I think this is the kind of antidote to the mass manufactured fussy high Victorian books. This is hand created simplicity. They'll be made in runs of 100. I mean, you can buy these today. Like cost you a couple of thousand each. But
yeah.
Well, maybe not the Chaucer ones.
Well, the funny part is, of course, he also produced different tiers. So he would produce versions of it on all vellum, and then he would do ones printed on paper that were slightly cheaper. But the full editions of these are absolutely kingly priced then and now. So
okay, we've still got a few to go, so I just want to rattle through. The Sacrum, which is the kind of this is the Austrian secession movement, and in my opinion, again, is super important for the kind of graphic development. It's a very strange form factor, and again, these guys are kind of looking at this is the kind of birth of modern graphic art, but also at the beginning of the end, the secession movement sort of leads on to like the cursed modernism. But let's plow through a couple. I mean, we can skip through these.
What's wrong with that? Looks great.
No. Again, this is just like pure. This is again kind of like super stripped back again. So this is another private press, the Essex House Press, and again they're just creating these super simple external books, but the insides are amazing. And again, hopefully we'll have a chance to kind of go through some of them.
So there's my edition of Carlisle is printed on vellum, so which was around this period, slightly later, and remarkably cheap. You know, you can find books from this period, outrageous luxury. You never believe it. So you have Ferry, well, I should have mentioned it. You have a beautiful set of Ruskin. Is that from this period as well?
Yeah, no. I've got I've got like a library edition from the 1910s, but I do own a Versacrum though. I have one which is quite nice. So that's one of my nicer books. This is a cover by Jan Torup, 1899. But this is again the kind of the birth of the modern printed cover, where again it's super flashy. It's almost like a big image. This is the kind of in between what people call Art Nouveau or Jugendstil and kind of modernist covers. I mean, Torup, I would say, has quite like deco-y vibes. Way beforehand, he kind of proceeds a little
nice,
bit.
Though. I like it. It's nice.
Yeah, I think it's a really beautiful book. There's also experiments with new fabrics. So this is a batik, which is like a wax dyed fabrics. So again, wax resist. There we go. So again, the Dutch fabrics. You know, all the Africans. If you go down to any kind of part of any market stall in England, in London nowadays, you'll see the kind of African fabrics. They're all based on these Dutch techniques, basically, which were sold to them. I think even today, most of them are produced by like a Dutch manufacturer. All of those kind of, you know, how like the Africans wear these kind of quite bright, quasi-ceremonial like African clothes. They're all from like a Dutch manufacture technique via Indonesia, actually. Okay, let's go through it. This is kind of like a Ruskin binding, actually, but this is kind of like English modern 1906 embossed leather, which I thought was quite simple but very beautiful at the same time. Done by the Women's Guild of Bookbinding. You know, one of Ruskin's attempts to get the guilds up and running. But I thought this is quite pleasant. But I wanted to kind of round out these last one with some kind of more modernist ones. This is obviously Blast, the Vorticist publication, and this is 1914. So again, just think about all of the fussiness, all of the ornamentation. This is just like a nuclear bomb in the so the interior of this is as good as the exterior. I mean, this is, I would say, a pivotal moment in graphic design, and the world was changed when this book was created. It's a simple, literally paper cover, but again, the color choice. You got to think they're harking back to the Yellow Book a little bit, but the font choice here, it's a sans serif bold type, nothing else, at an angle. I mean, it's revolutionary, and again, this is the kind of modernism that I can very much get behind. I think it's very, very beautiful and very powerful at the same time.
I just want to mention really quickly, Farah. I think I've mentioned this to you guys before, but I own a lot of books, as people know. My own personal favorite books are from this period, specifically hardback Oxford Clarendon Press books from around 1914 are amazingly high quality. They're just, I mean, from about, I would say, 1900 to about 1935, that little period there. Yeah, I don't know what they did, but they really might like the high quality. They typically have like a red cover, and they give you like a they've got the gold edge to the things, and they typically have that like tracing paper in the inside cover. But there are some amazing books from this period. I've got one. There's a book called Shakespeare's England, edited by C.T. Onions, which I think was published in
Onions again.
1902. Yeah, well, Onions. Funny enough, Onions also wrote a very, very good book on syntax. Which I used. That is also a really high quality print, by the way. If you get
these university press books were deliberately produced in very high quality, and they're quite archivally signed as well. It's amazing that they were able to kind of pull that together. But yeah, you're right about those.
Yeah,
I mean, not innovative like this, but
they're not. They're
very well done.
They're not innovative. They're just really nice books where I was like, I have no worries about this falling apart ever. I reckon you could read it in like 200 years' time and it would still, be sound. Anyway, carry on.
It's just the apex of like people who knew what they're doing plus, people who cared what they were buying.
I also have to mention, this is something that Mike from Imperium's talked about as well, but in my opinion, that was also that period from about 1900 up until probably the Second World War. That was probably also the apex of scholarship when it comes to like proper archival scholars, guys who really knew what they were talking about. Like I would take any of those guys over modern scholars. I mean, they make modern scholars look like dunces by comparison. Like these are guys who kind of knew everything, and they certainly knew their own subject inside and out. And I think there's been a terrible decline when it comes to the quality of scholars of that era versus the modern ones. It's kind of an aside, but yeah, I don't know. It's just my own personal view. So, carry on.
Okay, last one. So the next one I absolutely hate, but it's really important. This is Walter Gropius from the Bauhaus's International Architecture. I mean, this is the beginning of what the kind of modernism that I don't necessarily like too much. I'm pretty sure that every single textbook created for the 90 years afterwards was based on this stupid book, basically. This magazine.
There's what's that company? McGraw Hill. I mean, any book by them looks a bit like this.
Which is also name checked at the beginning of Allen Ginsberg's Howl, by the way. McGraw.
Really?
The green and King McGraw Hill building.
Yeah.
Gropius, miserable character.
There's influences from like Russian supremacism here, with the kind of like squares floating around in space. You have that kind of sans serif font here again, just like with Blast. But it like why I like Blast is it's just like there's sort of a comical element to it, but it's also kind of quite vigorous. I think this is all of Gropius's stuff is very sterile, I find, and it's this is the true the triumph of utility over beauty, basically. Like it's but it's still an important publication, I think. I've got just a few. Sorry, go on.
Oh, I would also say, just as a side, Walter Gropius was very interestingly married to a woman called Alma Mahler, who was the wife also of Gustav Mahler, the composer, and kind of the e-thought of her day. Anyway, carry on. And Gropius, of course, an architect, and who helped, who was the kind of progenitor of international style, which at its apex was fine, but was a disaster at its as it trickled down into everyday society. I would agree.
Yeah. Just going back onto kind of low books again. This is the first edition cover of The Great Gatsby. By this time, you've got things like dust covers and full color printing coming to the masses, basically. So you've got again. This is sort of the beginning of modern like book front covers with like you've got a picture on there and a text. But I think within like the first 5 years of people doing this, it was already perfected, and I really adore this one for the Great Gatsby. I think in terms of what a beautiful if you're having an image on your book cover, it should be something like this. Super clear title, strong use of the author's name, and then a powerful image at the same time.
I was going to mention that Pharaoh is that I noticed that in the earlier periods and even in the Victorian period as well, they don't always have the book title or the author's name. And we were mentioning the Folio Society. A lot of the Folio Society books don't have that on the front cover either. It's just a kind of pretty image or whatever. When did that really start becoming the norm? Was it here? Do you think?
It's the High Victorian period, still like 1880, I would say. But it's specifically for the low and like middle class books. It's those like cheap and nasty novels that they're pushing. Like I was saying, this is all to do with marketing. This is all about flogging books, selling books. This is why you have a big. The author's name is in large. The title's large. You want something that captures the eye. This is about selling the book, as opposed to exalting its context, its content, just like the medievals would do. This is just like, I see this as just like marketing, but it's kind of like beautiful marketing.
I hate the dust cover. I hate them. The bane of book collectors, because
Yes, yeah, they're
they
awful.
will become destroyed, and
Yeah.
and of course these books will lose a hell of a lot of their value if the dust cover is missing.
Yes, I accidentally bought a folio book without a dust cover, which I was a rookie error I made. I just didn't notice, and then I had to buy it again. So
You bought it again with the dust.
yeah, so you know what
Brilliant.
I'm like. Anyway,
Yeah.
let's carry on.
I thought this is quite a charming, like again, kind of like late modernist Art Deco book, Savoy cocktail book. So you've obviously got the kind of Savoy Hotel listing out some of their favorite cocktails, but I thought this was quite a charming and invigorating front cover. And again, this is the kind of modernism I can get behind. Basically,
He's a very masculine drinker, isn't he? He's unusually masculine.
Happy Chad
It's a good
sipping.
book as well, by the way.
Yeah,
I'm very into these early sort of classic cocktails. So
yeah. And then we sort of reached the kind of new modernist book covers, and again we sort of don't really get past this. I think we haven't really got past the 1930s book covers, but I still think this is possibly one of the better ones. Huxley's Brave New World, and with the dust cover, we've entered in this new world of fully gloss, full image printed covers, and I don't know. I don't think we've really got much beyond this personally. I don't know what your thoughts are, D, in terms of like.
we did the skill level has dropped in many cases. I would say. I mean, there's absolute nadir. I would say in certain periods to come, but I don't mind this. But again, I hate dust covers, even though this is a pretty good design. Much more interesting use of a sans serif. A sans serif. This probably been drawn. This is not a typeface. But yeah, it is the same idea that we're still living with.
Yeah, we're just rehashing those last two books over and over and over again. Now, basically, we're sort of stuck.
Forever.
Well, last three ones, yeah, the Gatsby and Brave New Worlds. Basically, if you look at any modern design, it's structurally similar to that, and thematically as well. The last one, this is the last one before the Second World War. This was Slezowski's periodical, which I quite liked as a kind of a combination of modernism and traditionalism. This is like a Polish sculptor who was in rather racy circles, let's just say, in the 30s. In the 30s, and this was Krak, Krak. But as a standalone graphic work, I think it's a nice combination of that kind of simplified modern designs, but also with, he was leaning on Polish traditionalism, some kind of Polish traditional ideas. So it's an interesting fusion of it's super stripped back, super clean and graphic, but at the same time, with the kind of the font, for example, obviously it's Polish, but it almost looks like it's an aliens language, etc. So I have a lot of time for it, but I'm not that keen on much graphic design beyond the 40s, if I'm honest with you. So this is kind of like my last. Oh, look, there we go. The collected works of Maxwell House there, exactly.
You think of that front cover then? Right.
I want to throw in one, Ferro, before we go.
Yeah, go on.
Is from the period of William Morris, that era, there was a press called the Doves Press.
Oh yeah.
Which probably, which produced a beautiful, beautiful Bible and a absolutely gorgeous typeface of their own. So if people are interested, you can look up the Doves Press. There's a very interesting history, of course. The founders of the Doves Press called Cobden Sanderson and Emery Walker. They got into basically a huge spat over the fate of the business, and so one night, Cobden Sanderson took the type, the famous Doves Press type, including the matrices to produce the type. and dumped them into the Thames. And so, of course, the dove's pipe was lost, and people later on tried to recreate. There are digital versions of it, but in 2015, I can't remember his name. There was someone who was researching this, and he, with the cooperation of the Port of London Authority, he went metal detecting around Hammersmith Bridge, and they actually found some of it. They found some pieces of pipe, and I believe some of the matrices. So that was a big, that was amazing actually to find that up after over 100 years. But yeah, beautiful. Another one of these kind of craft presses that came after William Morris, which a prized possession, the Dove Press Bible.
All right, so shall we do some super chats before we get out of here? Pharaoh, do you have time?
If we can make it quick, yeah.
Narco Republican says 46 years old and you can't even change a tire. A bit grey today, isn't it? Narco Republican says I have found a 1730. It's not that I can't do it. It's just there was no point. Narco Republican says I have found a 1791 Opera Omnia by Publius Virgilii Maronus. What is the oldest book you possess, Mr. D?
What's the oldest book I possess? I have I have a couple of things, very minor ones from the 16th century. So I have like 1550s or something. But I'd love to have, certainly, or everyone wants an incunabula, but surprisingly, of course, compared to other goods like modern art or automobiles and such, you can buy some of these books at surprisingly low prices. I mean, by surprisingly low, I'm talking about £10,000 or something like that. But they certainly pale in comparison to 20 million for a Cy Twombly picture. So they are attainable, but yeah.
All right. So Coney says, when I earn enough money, I will make sure to start a large folio book collection. Okay. Then over on the other super chats, there are yeah, we'll have to do the well, I'll call this one the Beauty of Books covers, and then the next one will be called the Beauty of Books inside or illustration
body.
Yeah. Machiavelli Sucks to Go says, good morning, White. Good Machiavelli Sucks to Go says, people are the savior of the world. Oh, I see, it follows on. Right, okay. C123 says, yes, Henlo, Pharaoh and Mr. D, do you have any preferred methods for cutting uncut pages? I have a few volumes of an 1880s Ruskin set and I need to do it.
Oof. I mean, you need a good paper knife. I would say that Semiagog is actually, I believe he made like Twitter threads about this. So if you want a real explanation, in print, I believe you can look at his Twitter feed and search for it. I think he's talked about it. But I mean, you need a good paper knife, and you need to be very careful and decide if you want to do that. Obviously, because once they're cut, they're cut.
I have decided that I hate uncut books. I hate doing it, and my solution is to buy a modern set that you can actually fucking read. I had a Carlyle set that I did that with, but I hate doing it. I hate it. That's one thing I don't miss at all. I think it's just that is an example of like actual progress, is having books where the pages are already cut, so you don't have to fucking do them yourself.
Well, and of course that was a weird innovation later on. I mean, early books, were all cut prior to you getting them for the most part.
I think Pharaoh's gone. I think he had to go. Which is all right. Drongo says in Swedish, bock, beach, and book is the same word. Machiavelli says, has there ever been quality J art? Well, I mean, the albums of Bob Dylan,
Lol.
The body of Jennifer Connelly. I don't know.
Stop it. I will say, there's a problem, of course, with Judaism and Islam, is that they're both extraordinarily iconoclastic, ideologies, and so of course that influenced their artistic history, because of course you couldn't depict the human form, you couldn't even depict animals in some cases, depending on the interpretation. So I think that certainly limited their production of art. They've always been more a literature-oriented people rather than imagistic. The Muslims got around it by focusing on, again, abstract decoration, digital kind of designs and such, rather than human depiction. Although they did, this idea that the Muslims never depicted Muhammad and never depicted human figures is not true. You can find many examples early on of devout Islamic art that do figure.
I read 99 Red Pills Go By says, we have the Spencer burger. Is there a Mr. D or an AA burger?
Yes, we can get into it another time, but yeah, I have a few house specialty burgers, but I tend to like just a very well done, normal burger.
Yeah, I have two different ones I could give you, but ask us again, and I'll tell you. I have to go and die in a moment. Just go back to bed. I'm feeling very rough. T Cog says, "Are you doing a Twitter space tonight?"
Yes, I think I am. I was going to do one last night, but I got too cozy. So yeah, you Twitter space tonight, probably.
All right, D. Anything you'd like to promote other than your Twitter space tonight?
No, Twitter space. Follow me on Twitter. Follow good old Pharaoh. And thanks to him for putting together this presentation. I always enjoy Pharaoh's work.
Join us tomorrow for Unpopular Opinions. Buy my courses, especially the Trivium, especially Foundations of Writing. If you're only going to buy one, buy Foundations of Writing, because you need it more than any other human being I've ever met. I am going to go and die, and hopefully I will be back by 9 p.m. tomorrow for Unpopular Opinions. Goodbye.
What goes on in this town is none of your business.
As long as I'm living here, it is.
Then maybe you shouldn't be living here!